It gives me great pleasure to introduce this re-recording of the first in our two-part series of Catherine, Woman of Hope. We have been most fortunate this year to have Sister Áine Barrins from Ireland in person with us to share her wonderful knowledge, but also especially her wonderful understanding and relationship with Catherine. And so, Áine, I really welcome you to this, and no doubt that this will be one of our gems that we keep, this recording, that we will be able to go back to it and really ourselves be able to become more in tune again with Catherine, Woman of Hope. Thank you, Áine.
Thank you very much, Mary Louise. And I'm delighted to be here to be able to share just a little bit of how I see Catherine and how I see her as a woman of hope. So what we're going to do, I thought it would be helpful if we went through a year in Catherine's life, and that gives us an understanding of the kind of woman she was. And then I will use a number of the letters from that year, only a few, and then we will have a little pause for reflection time, and we'll finish with the blessing. So we'll start by looking at a year in Catherine's life. And the year I chose is 1837. And at that stage, Catherine was 58 years old. So in January of that year, Dr. Murray, the Archbishop, approved Catherine's text of the Rule and Constitutions of the Sisters of Mercy. And you can see the second part of the slide there, where it's Catherine's own handwriting for the very first chapter of the Rule. But also you'll notice that there is a correction there, and it's what the Archbishop suggested as an edit in her work. Also in January, 4 young women professed their vows as Sisters of Mercy. One of those who made her profession in January was Sister Ursula Frayne, who was later to bring the sisters to Australia. In February, we had a young woman join the community. One of the sisters who had made her vows in January died 2 weeks later. And another sister who professed her vows at the end of January died in February, a few weeks later. In April, Catherine started a new foundation in Carlow, where Frances Ward was appointed leader. And Frances Ward was a very good friend of Catherine's and a great support to her. So she parted with her for the new foundation in Carlow. In May, June, sometime during those weeks, we're not sure exactly when, the Kingston controversy escalated. And I'm not going to go into that today, but it's just to note that it was something that happened in the year of 1837. And then at the very end of June, the last day of June, a novice died in Baggot Street. And meanwhile, on the morning of July the 1st, the following day, 4 sisters made their profession and 2 were received. And I often think of that when you think that there was probably the young sister laid out in her coffin upstairs and the rejoicing in the chapel downstairs for the professions and the reception ceremonies. And then in July also, Catherine and a few companions left for Cork, where she established a new community there. And Claire Moore was appointed the leader. And Claire Moore was also one of the very strong supports that Catherine had. And again, she let her go to be in leadership in the new community. And she was all of 23 at the time. And then later in July, Catherine returned to Baggot Street earlier than she had originally planned, because her niece Catherine was gravely ill. And shortly after her return, she fell down the stairs. In August, her niece and godchild Catherine died of consumption at the age of 18. And 2 new members joined the community. One of them was Catherine's godchild. She was an orphan whom Catherine had reared, and we'll talk about her later. And Catherine returned to Cork then in August to assist the new community. In the autumn, Father Daniel Burke, who was a Franciscan, he had been the chaplain since 1829, and he was now assigned to South Africa. So that left a vacancy in what was happening around the chaplaincy, and then by October of that year, Catherine was already embroiled in conflict with Dean Myler, the local parish priest, about the chaplaincy issue, who was going to come and provide the services of the sacraments and the Eucharist for the sisters and for the girls in her care. That conflict continued for about 18 months. And then in October, November, Dr. Nolan, the bishop in Carlow, died. After a brief illness, and another sister died, the 5th in this year. Now, Dr. Nolan was a really strong supporter of the little fledgling foundation in Carlow that was started in April. So that was a big loss to them. And then, once again, Catherine fell down the stairs, and this time she broke her left wrist. This happened in Kingstown. And in December of that year, she made one final desperate appeal to Father Hamilton, who was the bishop's secretary, to see if he could help sort the chaplaincy dispute. And then there was grave concerns about the foundation in Charleville. So if we just take a moment to look again at the headlines, if you like, of that year of 1837. So, as regards the sisters, what was happening? So we had 8 young women professed their vows that year. 3 new members joined the community. 5 sisters died. There was a lot of illness. And just to, go back to that a little bit, when I say 8 sisters professed their vows and 3 new members joined the community, that meant that there was a lot of work involved in actual preparation, in providing them with the training they needed and all of that. So Catherine would have been very involved in all of that. At an organisational level, there was local approval for the rule. The Roman approval didn't come until very shortly before Catherine died. 2 new foundations happened, one in Cork and one in Carlow. There were 2 major controversies that Catherine was involved in that took a lot of time and energy. And there was concern about the viability of one of the foundations down in Charleville. And then, at a personal level, Catherine herself, what was it like for her? So, we know that she experienced a lot of sorrow and anxiety. She experienced grief and loss, both at a personal level and with the sisters. There was a lot of travel involved, and I know when you're talking about travel and the size of Ireland and the size of Australia comes into question, but travel in those days was much more difficult than it is nowadays, of course. And so, for instance, it took 2 full days to travel to Cork by land. It was an overnight journey by boat. So it gives you some idea of the kind of travel that was involved for Catherine. She had 2 falls, and in the second of which, as we said, she broke her wrist. But also it shows great resilience of this woman, Catherine. So now I'm just going to go ahead and have a look at just a few of the letters from that year. So, but I'd like to just introduce the letters a little bit first. G.K. Chesterton said that a man's spirit is revealed in his letters. And I would think we can also say that a woman's spirit is revealed in her letters. And I would just invite an attitude of reverence as we begin the process of engaging with Catherine's letters. She never thought that 160 plus years after her death, that her letters would be available to us. And in one of her letters, she was very particular about encouraging discretion, and even marked some sections as private. Yet here we are with access to them, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful gift that we have. And I always feel we owe a great debt of gratitude to those early sisters who knew enough to preserve them, and to all the sisters down through the years who worked to preserve them. So she wrote many letters. As we can see, I have the latest volume of her letters here. The correspondence of Catherine McAuley, edited by Mary Sullivan, the late Mary Sullivan. In all, we have 325 pieces of correspondence, and 269 of them were written by Catherine. The others were either written to her or about her. And her letters were the main way she had of keeping in touch with the new groups that were being established throughout the country. And it also kept them in touch with each other. She frequently offered support and encouragement through her letters. And her love for the poor comes through many times. Her practical nature shines through. The depth of her faith and her unfailing confidence in God. Sometimes she refers to her own pain. And towards the end of her life, she actually did mention her failing health on a number of occasions. And she was often playful and whimsical in her letters. She wrote to lawyers and officials. She wrote to bishops and priests. She wrote to the Pope. She wrote to family. But of the 166 letters written, 69% of them were actually written to the sisters. So I'd like to just give an outline of just some of the things, how she opened her letters and how she closed her letters. So one of my favourites is a poem that she wrote to the youngest sister in Beckett Street when she was gone on that foundation to Carlow. And she said, "My dearest, darling, youngest daughter." I love that one. But her most usual way of addressing was, "My dear Sister Mary Elizabeth," or "My dear Sister Mary Frances." But then she deviated at times, depending on the occasion or the person she was writing to or what she was writing about. So she had, "My dearest Sister Mary Frances," "My ever dear Sister Mary Frances." And then her most usual way of concluding the letter was, "Your ever attached MC McAuley." But then, of course, there were variations to that too. "Your very fondly attached MC McAuley." "My own dearest child and sister, believe me at all times and under all circumstances, the very same fondly attached MC McAuley." And when she says, "my own dearest child and sister," it's not that she treated them as children. It really was the affection in which she held them. And as I said, Claire Moore went to Cork as leader at the age of 23, so she did trust them so much. "My ever dear Sister Mary Frances, may God bless and preserve you, my dearest child, is the constant prayer of your ever fond MC McAuley." And then she has one, "My darling Sister Elizabeth," and she finished, "Your ever most affectionate MC McAuley." And there was one, I can't put my eye on it, where she said, "Your own old affectionate MC McAuley." So she was very warm and very tender in her letters. So the first letter I would like to have a look at for the year of 1837 was a letter to Elizabeth Moore on July the 27th of that year. So in this letter, she's writing to Elizabeth Moore to ask her to take care of one of the other sisters who's quite ill at the moment. And Elizabeth Moore lived in Kingstown, which is out about 5 miles from Baggot Street, and it's a place near the seaside. And she gives very specific instructions for the care of this young sister who was ill. But we also get the human touch of Catherine herself in it. So she says, "My dear Sister Mary Elizabeth, my poor dying child requested I would be sent for, and as she was quite anxious that I should remain to the end of the month with Sister M. Clare, etc., I concluded she was drawing near to the end, and hastened back immediately. She is so much changed that if I had not seen similar cases greatly protracted, I would say she was going very rapidly out of this miserable world. I am weary of all my travelling, and this morning I fell down the second flight of stairs. My side was quite sore, but if ever so well able, I could not leave my poor child." Sister Sousa, for whom we are all particularly interested, is recommended sea air. I would be delighted to be any way instrumental in enabling her to go on in the state she prefers, which cannot be except some favourable change takes place in the state of her health. Will you, my dear, get the room our darling Catherine was in prepared for her and Sister Teresa Mary, and give her all the care you can for a little time. She is so gentle, it will be no difficult matter to please her. A little broiled meat, or whatever she tells you she can take. Not to get up till breakfast time, except you have Mass, and that she feels able. Not to go out, except she likes to try a short walk. Great tenderness of all things. You and Sister Chantal might come in the steam train tomorrow to see me, and the two sisters can return with you. Sister Mary Angela will have the room ready. Come in early. Give my most affectionate love to all. Your ever attached, M.C. McAuley. So we see there the human touch of Catherine herself, admitting her own vulnerability, if you like. I am weary of all my travelling, and then fell down the stairs. And then the detail she gives for the care of the sister. Give her all the care you can for a little time. She's so gentle, it'll be no difficult matter to please her. A little broiled meat, so she specifies a little broiled meat, or whatever she tells you she can take. And, she needn't get up until breakfast time. She needn't be there for the early morning prayers, except if you have Mass, and that she feels able. And not to go out, except she likes to try a short walk. So it's like a charter, I think, for how we need to treat people who are ill. Let them be the people who dictate and say, this is how we need to do it. And then the greatest sentence, great tenderness of all things. So it's like she's saying, well, whatever else you do, just be tender. So I think it's a wonderful letter and a wonderful indication of the kind of woman that Catherine was. And certainly it speaks to me of hope in a way that is just so gentle and so tender. So the next letter I would like to have a look at is from the beginning of August the 8th, and she's writing to Father Fitzgerald. So he was the rector of the college in Carlow, where Catherine's nephews went to school. And so she would have known him for many years, and he became a dear friend. So she's writing to him the morning after her niece Catherine has died. And you'll notice again just the change in tone, if you like. She says, "My dear Reverend Father," and she finishes, "Your attached and the faithful MC McAuley." So it's a different level from where she's talking to the sisters. So, "My dear Reverend Father, our innocent little Catherine is out of this miserable world. She died a little before 12 o'clock last night. She suffered very little, thanks be to God. Not more than 1 hour of distressed breathing, and her playfulness continued to the end, mingled with an occasional awful feeling, but nothing like melancholy. She represented Mrs. Deasy on her arrival from Cork yesterday morning most perfectly. She received the last sacraments on Saturday with delight and great fervour. We feel just now as if all the house was dead. All are sorry to part our animated, sweet little companion. I hope you have been pretty well since I had the pleasure of seeing you. I suppose the sisters are in retreat, as they are here, except for those who were engaged in the scene of sorrow with me. Thank God it is over. I know you will pray for me. As to her, I believe she was fit to unite with the angels, so pure and sincerely devoted to God. I shall be obliged to return to Cork after the retreat. May I beg you to give my most affectionate love to my dearest sister Frances and the little community, and to believe me, dear Reverend Father, with great respect, your attached and faithful MC McAuley. So again, we just notice this very human woman writing to her friend who was older. It was, we must remember Catherine was a generation ahead of all the young people that she was dealing with. And she needed the comfort and the consolation, I suppose, of somebody whom she knew, who was a friend to her in her hour of need. And, she speaks about her niece, Catherine, with such affection. And again, we just must remember Catherine's sister Mary died in 1827. She left 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. And this Catherine, who died now at the age of 18, was only 7 or 8 at the time that her mother died. So Catherine McAuley would have been very involved in her nieces and nephews' formative years. And, so she speaks of her young Catherine with such affection. And she says, when she talks about her imitating Mrs. Deasy, who came from Cork, imitating the Cork accent, because the Cork accent in Ireland is very distinct. It's very musical. It goes up and down a good bit. And, she said, all are sorry to part our sweet little companion. And then, she reaches out to him and how he is and all of that. And then next sentence, thank God it is over. Just the human thing of that, how God was so close to her and so involved in every sentence of her life nearly. And I suppose it's what happens when we are when we mourn the loss of somebody that we love, especially if we're keeping vigil with somebody who is dying. And there's that double thing going on all the time between we want them and their suffering to be over, and yet we don't want them gone. And, so there's a relief when the person has died, and also there's the pain and the separation. So she was just so human in her understanding of it all. And just let me check my next letter. So the next letter then that I have from that year is in October. And this one she wrote to Sister Teresa White. Now, Teresa White was in Carlow at the time. She was on loan in Carlow, helping out with the new foundation there, because it started in April and this is October. And what has happened in October is that the bishop has died. Remember, I mentioned that on the slides. So she's writing to Teresa because she wants Teresa to kind of get around Francis Ward, who is experiencing great loss and great sorrow on the death of the bishop. He was really kind to her. He was only in his 40s, and he had a really good relationship with the sisters and with the people of the town. So Francis would have depended on him a lot. But we're told in another context that she took to the bed after he died. And so Catherine is kind of trying to, go in a circular way, we'll say, to get to Francis, to, I suppose, step up to her responsibility, really. So, my dear Sister Mary Teresa, I was in part prepared to receive the melancholy news conveyed in your letter by the account which reached Mr. Lynch of this town a few days previous. The dear saintly bishop has got an early crown, and we have now a valuable friend in heaven, whose advocacy will be soon experienced by those who humbly bend to the adorable will of God. My ever dear affectionate Sister Mary Frances will soon, I trust, give great edification to you all by her perfect composure and entire resignation. Submit we must, but we should do much more. We should praise and bless the hand that wounds us, and exhibit to all around us a calm, quiet appearance and manner. I trust in God this will be manifest among you, afflicted as you are. When I promised to go to my dear Sister Frances in time of trial, you may be sure, my dear child, I did not mean the trial which death occasions, with which I am so familiarized that the tomb seems never closed in my regard. I alluded to those difficulties which her new state exposed her to, such as incurring the displeasure of her spiritual superiors without intention, or experiencing marks of disapprobation and not knowing why. These are some of the bitter sweets incident to our state, and most of all requiring support and counsel. The sorrow in which she now so deeply shares is extensively divided, and equally the affliction of many. The poor presentation nuns, who were so long his spiritual children, had not, I suppose, the happiness of seeing him, and the priests and people, what must they feel? To regard it as an individual sorrow would not be right. Our portion of it may well be lost in the lamentations of his poor and destitute people. Yet I can account for my dear Sister Mary Frances feeling so much on this distressing occasion. The good bishop afforded her the first and chief comfort she experienced on parting me, etc., etc. But I know she will not continue unmindful of the exalted obligations of our holy state, and I will confide in the generous bounty and never ceasing kindness of our blessed Saviour, to which we must put no impediment, that he will pour down on you all, my dear sisters, his sweet, abundant consolation, and that I will find you in a few days perfectly tranquil and reasonably cheerful. You do not mention Dr. Fitzgerald. If at home, I am sure he is kind. With the most fervent prayers and fondest affection for my tender, ardent, beloved Sister Mary Frances, and for you all, I remain, my dear Sister Mary Teresa, most sincerely, your attached mother in Christ, Mary C. McAuley. So, just a little background on some of that letter. I suppose in this letter there's one paragraph that touches into Catherine's understanding of suffering and the cross. And we will be dealing more with that in the next session. But she says, submit we must, but we should do much more. We should praise and bless the hand that wounds us. And that seems to me like the honours course. You know, she's all the time, she comes back to this again and again, that God is not giving crosses in anger, and that God remains constant and loving through it all, through suffering of every kind. And that's how she looks on it. We should praise and bless the hand that wounds us. Very, very challenging. And then she talks about Francis. And she says, yet I can account for my dear Sister Mary Frances, feeling so much on this distressing occasion. So Frances Ward suffered a lot of grief in her life, in her young life particularly. Her mother died when she was very young. Her older brother was about to be ordained a priest, and he died very suddenly one morning. She lost a sister very shortly after that. And then at one stage, her father and the rest of the family had to move from the property that they were living in because they were dispossessed of their land. So she suffered a lot of grief. And Frances was very close to Catherine's other niece, Mary, who had already died. So Catherine knew Frances very well. And she's sympathizing with her in her grief. And at the same time, she's calling her into her role and into what she was about. So the next letter I would like to focus on then is a letter that she wrote to Frances Ward in August of 1837. So she says, my dearest Sister Mary Frances, I am glad to have an opportunity of forwarding a few lines to you. Thanks be to God you are all so well and happy and doing so much for the afflicted poor. Blessed and happy life which makes death so sweet. Our dear Catherine might indeed have sung in the last hours of her innocent life, O death, where is thy sting? For she did not seem to feel any. I have suffered more than usual with my old pain of sorrow and anxiety. My stomach has been very ill. Poor Sister de Padsy was twice very bad with a short interval. I am almost sure Maria Sousa cannot remain. Her delicacy increases daily. I pity her very much. She is so desirous and so gentle and complying. Teresa Byrne took the postulant's dress on the assumption to fill my dearest child's vacancy. She is delighted and promises great things. May God give her grace. Sister Mary Clare's eldest sister has joined us. She is Mary Clare by baptism. A Miss Fanning from the County Meath comes in tomorrow, which will make 10 postulants, including Bessie Hughes and Eliza Smith, lay sisters. This is all the news I have for you, my own dearly beloved child. The rule is ready for you, but we wait, hoping to get His grace to affix His approbation. I expected to be in Cork before this. I am waiting for a packet. One got off without my hearing of it, and my poor Sister Mary Clare will be sadly disappointed. Indeed, I have left her in an unfinished state. She writes full of fears and doubts. Indeed, I know she has too much to encounter until the way was made more easy for her. Pray God, I will soon go there. God preserve and bless you, my ever dear child. Give my most affectionate love to all the dear sisters. Your very fondly attached, M.C. McAuley. You are truly fortunate in all the circumstances of your little foundation. Nothing that I know of like it. So, if Frances Ward was the fair-haired child, Carlo was the fair-haired foundation. And just again, the humanness of Catherine. I have suffered more than usual with my old pain of sorrow and anxiety. My stomach has been very ill. And then talking about De Padsy, who was like the second in command, if you like. And she had, we think it was epilepsy. And so she had 2 bouts that were very serious. And Catherine was coping with that as well. And then she says about Teresa Byrne took the postulant's dress on the assumption to fill my dearest child's vacancy. So Teresa Byrne was her first cousin's daughter, Anne Conway's daughter. And Anne Conway had died, I think, in childbirth with Teresa. So Catherine adopted her. So she had reared her. And now she's going to become a member of the community. Now, she was living in Beckett Street, but wasn't a member of the community as such. And she was only 15 or 16 at this stage, you know. But she said, to fill my dearest child's vacancy. Now, in the original letter, what's in Catherine's own handwriting, what was originally written was, to take my dearest child's place. And then she crossed that out and wrote, to fill my dearest child's vacancy. So it's just like the hint that you get of the personal grief that Catherine was experiencing in the midst of everything else that was going on as well. And the rest of the letter then is just newsy, really, of different people that came and went and all of that. But I just thought it was worth highlighting that section on you know, her own, the hint you get at her own story. So that brings the session on the letters to a conclusion. And we just go back to the slides. So what do these letters tell us about Catherine as a pilgrim of hope? She showed great compassion and tenderness through the letters. She shared her personal vulnerability. She gave great attention to detail. She needed her friends. She continued to remain faithful through it all, through every single detail. This was her only goal, to remain faithful. She showed quite considerable leadership skills in the midst of it all. And she was unshakable. She had an unshakable faith and trust in God. And we'll see more about that in the next session. And we always come back to that, my God, I am yours for time and eternity. So, what do you think sustained Catherine and helped her keep hope alive during that year of 1837? And what sustains you and gives you hope through the challenging times in your life? And I'd like to finish with a blessing from Catherine. And this was a few months before she died. So she said, I earnestly pray God to preserve you in health and to bless you with his divine grace, granting you renewed vigour every day to carry you happily to the journey's end. Amen.